get us started. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Smart City Kids College Admissions Workshop. My name is Erica Papier, and I'm an advisor and the corporate client specialist at Smart City Kids. I'm also the parent of a 3rd grade boy and a 7th grade girl. I would love it if everyone could take a moment to put in the chat what grade your child is currently in. I just want to briefly introduce Smart City Kids. You know we're here if you ever need us. For the last 20 years, Smart City Kids advisors have guided parents and students through the admissions process for entrance into all grade levels, starting with the little ones in nursery school and continuing all the way through college admissions, including boarding school and special education. We work with families throughout the New York area, as well as across the globe for families who are relocating. Smart City Kids also has clients who are schools, and we support them with various areas of their work. And we work with corporations like yours to provide workshops about parenting, education, and admissions. So we also work with corporations who are recruiting new talent to help them find schools. And lastly, our advisors offer parenting sessions where we discuss parenting and education-related topics. Smart City Tutors also support students of any age and ability. So if your child is in extra need of support, we can work with you through Smart City Tutors. So I am very pleased to introduce my wonderful colleague, Marielle Kessler. Marielle comes to college advising with over 15 years of experience in higher education. She began her admissions career at Columbia Business School and stayed with Columbia to manage their MPA in Environmental Science and Policy. Having also spent time at the University of Washington School of Medicine and Academic Affairs and said business school at the University of Oxford, where she directed MBA admissions. She brings a unique perspective to the undergraduate experience, understanding the diverse types of portfolios that top schools are looking for. Marielle found her true passion in higher education, working as an associate dean for undergraduate admissions at Princeton University, where she worked with the math and physics department, arts department, and was head of legacy applications. Her background and knowledge of schools around the US and the world enabled her to pivot to a career advising high school students from a range of backgrounds and interests. She loves helping students and their families navigate the college process, and most importantly, help students find their voice and the right fit school. So Marielle will present for around 45 minutes and then leave time for questions. And for those of you who are just joining now, please remember to put the grade of your child in the chat so we can have a sense of our audience. I'm pleased to share that Smart City Kids is offering a promotion to those who are attending this workshop today. So we will provide a discount on an initial consultation with Marielle of 15%. And I can put the discount code in the chat, or you can email me. So Marielle, the floor is yours. The few people who have shared in the chat, we have a 10th grader, a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, and I'm sure others are right in that neighborhood. So the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Erica. Thank you again. So as Erica said, I will be speaking to navigating the college admissions process. And what I'd really like to do is give you a fairly broad overview of what's expected, assuming, or as I saw, you do have a range of students who will be applying and are thinking about applying. So really, so that you can prepare at any point in the process and feel like you have a good handle on what's expected. So today, we'll talk about how to prepare. We'll very briefly touch upon a standard college application, cover a few resources for you, have a little bit of focus on selecting schools and fit. Erica will then speak a little more to Smart City Kids Services, should she feel like she didn't do so in the introduction, and then we'll open it up to questions. So if you want to start as I speak, to put some questions in the chat as we go along, and I'll do my best to answer those at the end. So I really wanted to set the tone here today. And the point of, I really think, what makes a strong application and then really gives students the best outcomes is setting intentions. So really having students strive for a sense of purpose, a sense of balance, and a strong sense of self. And students who are able to achieve that by the time that they're applying to college at any level really submit wonderful and truly strong applications. What I've certainly witnessed in my time at the Ivy League and at business schools around the world is a burnout for students for whom they are trying to make themselves into something they're not. So something that we have always encouraged and that we encourage students still to do is to really find what it is that they like to do. And you'll hear me say this a lot throughout today's presentation. What are they passionate about? What do they enjoy doing? They also need to find a sense of balance. So not everybody needs to be spending all of their time studying it in the classroom, right? We want students to explore and show us a different sense of self, but also giving them an outlet, right? So you can't just be studying all the time, but you need to have a different way to sort of relieve those pressures. So really finding that balance for themselves. And then finally, that will lead to what we hope would be a strong sense of self. So knowing what they would like. It's hard to do at this age, of course, and students do change their minds. So we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But having an idea, at least, of what they think they might like to do and knowing exactly what they don't like to do will really serve them well in this process. I would say that applications that are constructed, so applications that it's clear that a student is trying to make themselves fit in a box that they don't belong in, are difficult to read. And so we really do encourage students, really, whatever that passion happens to be, whether that's a love of earth sciences or theater or engineering, there's really no one right way to submit an application or one really magic formula that gets you into university. So making sure that those intentions are set at the very beginning. I think one of the best ways to think about high school in this process is as a funnel. So ninth grade gives you a really great base, right? It's wide, you have time to explore. If you have the option and the ability to take an a course, an optional course, it's a good time to think about and perhaps try something new. So maybe you want to take a theater course or an introduction to engineering course, or perhaps really love art and you can take a studio art course, or perhaps you studied Mandarin all throughout grade school and you've always wanted to learn Spanish, so you sign up for Spanish 1. Ninth grade is a really great time to explore, think about what it is you'd like to do, and really begin to think about, what are those intentions that you want to set for yourself? Really, perhaps you've always thought you wanted to be a doctor, and then you take your biology class in ninth grade and you don't like it at all, right? So ninth grade is a really great time to have all of these discussions with yourself as a student, with your parents, with your children, really thinking about what you'd like to do. It's also a great time to try new things, going out for different types of clubs and activities. Perhaps you've always wanted to play a certain sport and that hasn't been available to you before. Ninth grade should really be a time for exploring, and that's something that we really encourage students to do and to consider. The funnel narrows slightly in 10th grade, right? We want students to begin to really start to challenge themselves academically if they haven't already done so. We want them to begin to develop relationships with their teachers, with their advisors, with their peers, if they haven't already begun to do so. We want them to think about perhaps what type of leadership roles they might like to take later on in high school, as most high schools generally have leadership roles once you get into once you become an upperclassman. So thinking again about what were those activities that you enjoyed doing in ninth grade, what would you like to explore in 10th grade perhaps, as well as making sure that you're doing your best in your courses, because what you're going to be gearing up for is 11th grade, which I think is one of the most difficult years. It'd be negligent not to touch upon 10th grade summer. So after ninth grade, summers become a little important for students. So 10th grade summer students should perhaps think about trying something new, whether that is going to a summer camp for violin study, or whether they wanted, they've always wanted to learn to code, so they go to a coding camp, whatever that may be. So really thinking about how they want to apply themselves over the summer in 10th grade. So the funnel has narrowed quite a bit, not so much as 12th grade, but certainly a lot in 11th. 11th is definitely the year that schools spend a lot of time looking at, and I'll go into this in a little more detail in a bit. So we really want students to have increased their rigor, so taking more difficult courses than they have before. We expect them to be performing well there. We'd really love them to begin to compile lists of schools that they think they might like to attend. It's a great time, as is 10th grade, to start visiting schools that students think that they might like to go to. They could do so over the summer, over spring break. There are lots of times to go fall break if the school has that. And we really encourage that. So something to really think about there in 11th. Thinking about the activities, are you showing an interest across are you showing an interest in academic areas? Are you also showing an interest through your extracurricular activities? Sometimes they align, right? Students who might want to study engineering is always a really great example here. Sometimes students who might want to study engineering, thinking about joining a robotics club or making sure that you are learning different computer languages is a really good way to show that you're going above and beyond outside of the classroom. So schools are really going to expect to see that throughout high school, but most certainly at least in 11th grade. At 12th grade, that funnel narrows even more. And the reason it does so is because it's the year that you will be applying to school. So you're certainly going to have that very targeted list that we would like you to have developed, and you will be writing those applications. The great part is that there is a payoff at the end of the tunnel, and that is being accepted to a really wonderful school that's a really great fit for your students. So we're really, as the funnel narrows and it gets a little more intense, there is a good payoff there once you sort of come out the other end. So really kind of wanting to go back into that more deeply, I think it's really important to think about these more concretely. So grade 9, as I said, is thinking about what academics would a student like to follow? What are they thinking about? Have they always played in the orchestra and making sure that they sign up to continue to play in the orchestra? As far as exploring extracurricular activities go, have they always wanted to, play lacrosse and now that's available to them? Have they heard about debate and if that feels like an activity they might like to do? But really, trying a lot of new things. 9th grade is the year to try out a lot of new things, whether that's volunteering or whether that is maybe just starting a project on their own. Some students are a little more introverted and perhaps they are writers or they enjoy reading and they've set themselves a challenge to read, I don't know, the 50 best great books by the time they graduate. They keep a really detailed list, right? There are many ways to show that you are engaged outside of the classroom. So 9th grade, thinking about how they'd like to do that. Thinking about in terms of academics, it's not just taking the most rigorous courses available to a student, but is that the best fit for them? Are those courses that they're going to excel in? And that's something that we always want to keep in mind. Again, beginning to develop those relationships at school, not because letters of recommendation will come from freshman year teachers, but because it's a good skill to start to have, especially as you progress throughout school. And then really taking the time, I would say, at the end of the year, at the very least, to assess likes and dislikes. I think this is something that can get lost in the mix, but really thinking about what your student liked and what they didn't like. Did they thrive in that honors math course, or was that a course that perhaps should have been down the next level, and will it be even harder the following year? So really thinking about what worked and what didn't work. Perhaps they didn't find something that they were truly passionate about. That's okay. You have many years ahead of them, but thinking perhaps what they'd like to go out for in 10th grade. So in 10th grade, really, again, the coursework is paramount here. So really focusing on what they're studying and what they're doing. Usually this is when sort of those honors courses or AP courses or whatever a school happens to follow starts to kick in. And this is where it becomes really important to think about a student's curriculum, right? And that's what I mean when I talk about rigor. So are students beginning to follow a rigorous curriculum, particularly if they're targeting what we would consider to be pretty selective school. So a selective school is generally described as a school with a 10% or less admission rate. So if that's what your student is aiming for, then curriculum becomes very important. So you want to make sure that they're challenging themselves, and then that's very visible on the transcript. Again, developing those passions, if they were not able to figure out what that was in ninth grade, and many students are not, and that's perfectly fine, but really thinking about that in grade 10 is quite important. And I'll get into that because I'll show you actually some examples of applications to give you a real sense of why it's important that they develop these passions, largely because they'll have to write about them. It's really hard to write about something that you're not passionate about. Starting that preliminary college list in 10th grade is always a good idea. Oftentimes, it's just a list of schools that students have heard of, or perhaps schools that you yourself might have attended, and that's perfectly okay. We really want them just to get thinking about what it might be like to attend school, right? And I'll go into how to assess fit at the very end, but really, do they like a big campus? Do they want to go to football games every weekend? Did they always think they would go out for Greek life? Talk to them, what kind of weather are they thinking about when they think of college? All of these things might sound silly, but these are places where students do live for 4 years, and it's important that they find an environment that they like. So really thinking about that preliminary list. A preliminary list also is good for you as parents to help your students set intentions. So if every school on that preliminary list is a school in this highly selective category of admission rates with less than 10%, then it's time to talk about what it means to go to one of these schools. And that means doing a tremendous amount of work on the students' side of it. And so I'll talk about that a bit in 10th and then certainly more down the line. So that preliminary college list, again, is a really great gateway for conversation. So if a student perhaps is not trying their hardest in their coursework and they have all Ivy League schools generally having, at least this year, less than 3% admission rates, talking about perhaps increasing the rigor on this of that academic those academic choices. So that preliminary college list serves, I think, a lot of different masters, which is a good thing. And then, as I said, summer planning. So this is the year to really think about how best to use a summer. And there are lots of ways to use a summer. I think it's a great way to demonstrate interest in perhaps a chosen field. And there are a few fields out there that do expect to see some interest and some some actual hands-on experience, and those would largely be engineering schools, engineering programs, as well as actually undergraduate business programs. It may not be first and foremost in your minds, but actually if students are interested in pursuing business at the undergraduate level in a very specific way, not by study of economics, but by study of an actual undergraduate sort of MBA like program, then they would need to have some sort of summer experience in that way. The other one I'll mention just sort of offhand is Cornell's hotel school. They generally expect to see something in the realm of hoteling, a word I made up, rather, students volunteering or students having an internship, etc. So lots of ways to use summer planning there. And then you roll into 11th grade. So this is really the time for students to hone in on their studies. They really need to think about, okay, what is it that I think I might like to be applying for? Is it arts and humanities? Am I more STEM focused, science, technology, engineering, and medicine? Am I a student who isn't entirely sure? And that's okay. Then I would recommend having a very wide variety of courses to hone in on. Is what I'm studying at this level, did I like it enough in 10th grade to really pursue it again in 11th? So really honing in on that study. Also making sure that students are performing extremely well. So I would say, one of the things that universities are going to look at, and I think sometimes this gets a little lost in the mix, is the transcript. So sometimes I think students and families can get a little overzealous on the activities, and then they seem to forget that these are actually first and foremost academic institutions. So making sure that your student is performing well in the classroom, and that rigor has increased so that they are taking a for them, for the schools that they're targeting, a demanding course load. So really thinking about how they're going to show that in this, their most demanding year yet in high school, that upper class, their first upper class year, that they're doing really well. And schools and universities are going to pay particular attention to this year because this is generally the start of the most difficult time, right? The grade 11 is also when to begin to plan and prepare for test prep. So whether that's the ACT or the SAT, I wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you exactly what will happen with testing in the years to come. But the best I can do is give you my best advice at the moment and what I tell my current students and who I work with, which is that, schools, regardless of their language on their website, and their language is actually, we're at a law firm. Their language is quite clear, and it should be in terms of the legalese, basically, that they use, that they expect students to take a test, essentially, which isn't to say that they don't accept students who don't have a test, but they, by and large, if a student has the means and ability to take a test, then schools will expect to see a test. So 11th grade is generally when we see students really begin with that test prep. And I recommend students really consider starting to do that. They can start as early as the summer of after 10th grade, after sophomore year, going throughout the fall of junior year, and then really it depends how great your student is at testing. If they're really great at testing and they've been studying and preparing for a test, they could sit for one of the December test dates in 11th. But most students, by and large, the first time they take an SAT tends to be in March of their junior year, and an ACT in February of their junior year. So they usually spend about 6 to 9 months preparing. Obviously, it's wonderful if your student can hit it out of the park on their first try and never have to take it again, but it's not always what I see, and that's okay. They have a few other times to sit and take those exams. I personally have seen students do very well when they try again in May or June, which is when the ACT and SAT is offered, because they have continued to study throughout and not taken a break in studying. It is a lot to ask of your students in 11th grade, and I certainly understand that, which is why a lot of students opt to take it the second time in August. After that, they have a few more chances in 12th grade to take it if that second chance didn't go like they thought. But after 3 times, it's honestly a case of diminishing returns. So we generally don't recommend that students take a test more than 3 times. Lots of test prep talk, I know, but something to really think about and consider, because it does bite into students' time. And this is, as I said, an extremely important academic year. A great time to plan and go on college visits and really think about that preliminary list, and then think very seriously, based off of how I'm doing in my test prep, and based off of, how my grades are, and looking at the school profiles that are available are available on the websites of any of the schools that your students might be interested in, and thinking, is this a target school for me? Is this a school that I am well within their range of being admitted? Is this going to be a reach for me? Is this a school where I don't really fall into their target range, or perhaps I do, but this is a school, again, that is extremely selective and has a 10% or less admission rate? And then schools that I think everybody should have on their list, which would be a few, absolute, what we call likely schools. So schools that you have a high probability of being admitted to. Everybody needs a few likely schools, particularly if the process does not go the way that you were hoping. So it's good to visit a range of schools there. 11th grade summer is also equally important. it's really important to secure summer plans at this point. So whether that is applying again to some of the more elite summer programs, depending on what your student likes to study. Off the top of my head, for the arts, that generally is Interlochen or Tanglewood, some Juilliard pre-summer programs. If your students, those are all arts programs, if your students are interested in the arts. For science and STEM programs, that's RSI at MIT or the Women in Technology program at MIT, summer science program at Stanford, etc. There are a lot. I could go on and on, but we have time constraints here. And I don't know your students very well, so it's hard for me to list off many, but those are the ones that have very rigorous applications, actually, which I think are a really great way for your students to get their feet wet in terms of what the application process is going to be like in the coming year. And it also, a lot of them have portfolios that have to be submitted. So there are very strict deadlines associated with these, and I never want students to miss them. So 11th grade is the time to sort of start doing your research and keeping your eye out for those summer programs and plans. This is also the year that you will ask your teachers for letters of recommendation. For most schools, you need two from your course teachers. So your core course teachers. So those are generally math, science, social studies, history, foreign language, English, etc. Our best advice always is to ask teachers who have enjoyed having you in their classroom, teachers who are going to write you a really strong letter of recommendation. So that often does not mean choosing the most popular teacher, but the teacher for whom you are popular, right? So really making sure that you're asking teachers who like you. And that may sound very silly, but I have read tens of thousands of applications in my time. And that is not an exaggeration, unfortunately. A lot of time reading these. And that is my true best advice. So pick somebody who likes you. Really should come from junior year. That's when you've, I think, really come into yourself as a person. They've also just had you in their course, so they know you very well. If you had somebody in sophomore year who you particularly bonded with and you really want them to write that letter, I'm not going to argue, but I would really recommend that you consider the junior year teachers, right? So thinking about that, and then I occasionally get, well, what about freshman year? And it's just 2 years has passed, and it's nearly 3 at this point. It's been a little too long. So we really want you to have somebody who's had you in that classroom. So really thinking about that. You'll also receive a letter of recommendation from your school counselor. And then if schools all have very different rules about additional letters of recommendation. So I can troubleshoot some of those for you, but that's all available on their websites. They all have really wonderful FAQs, but again, happy to help. And then spending time at the end of 11th, evaluating your college list, really based off of performance. Yes.
Before someone wanted you just to confirm, there was a quick question in the chat, how many letters of recommendation? Can you just confirm that?
Yeah, it's 3 letters of recommendation. It's 1 from the school guidance, from the school counseling office. So usually the college counselor writes that letter. All schools are different though, but that's generally who writes the 1 letter. So everybody gets that one. And then students are asked or told to ask for 2 letters of recommendation from teachers. So just 2, please. Most schools won't read more than that. Some schools are nice and they'll read whatever you send, but 2. You don't want to send too many letters, and it looks like you're trying to hide something. So 2 letters.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I will say occasionally we'll see, let's say a student did the Garcia Scholars Program at Stony Brook and they loved it. Sometimes their advisor there might write a letter, or they did a summer program at Brown and they performed at the top of their class, and whomever taught that will write a letter. It's fine to have those additional letters of recommendation. Again, not too many. My rule of thumb at Princeton was if I had to count how many letters you sent in, then that was too many letters. So really, cap yourself to meaningful experiences if you're going to send in additional letters. And then finally, it's time to really evaluate that college list, because what I hope you'll all do is spend the summer of 12th grade, in addition to having, vacation and perhaps some interesting intellectual summer plans, is writing your applications. And we can get a little into that in 12th, but evaluating that college list and thinking about, okay, is this a balanced list? Making sure you go to your college counseling office and showing them your list, and parents, obviously going with your students and having these discussions is key to their success, right? So that's something that we really encourage. So is this a balanced college list for your student? Will they have options at the end of the day when April rolls around of senior year? Will they have a couple of letters of a couple of offers of admission, and will they be happy with all of those? So really thinking about that college list. Some schools, not all schools, use programs called Naviance and SCORE. Those are just two of them. I raise them because you might not know about them, and they're actually really wonderful tools that your student has access to, in which they can download, if the school keeps track of this data, they can download a scatter plot of everybody from that school. It's all anonymized. Everybody from that school who had as applied in the last usually 5 years, where they fell in terms of grades, and where they fell in terms of testing, and whether or not they were admitted, waitlisted, or rejected, generally what admission plan they used. And that can give you actually a very strong sense. And it's one of the few sort of data points I can point you to in this very murky process, unfortunately, that can give you a really good sense of that college list. So if that's available to you, I really encourage you to use it. If it's not available to you, then talking to the school counselor is usually a really great place to start anyway. This brings us to 12th grade, where I've included my first exclamation points of this PowerPoint, and perhaps my only ones. So this is actually, these are very important points. So what admission officers and what universities do not want to see is that a student has dropped down in their academic rigor. So in 11th grade, they took an extremely strong curriculum for that student, whatever that might have been, whether that was 2 honors classes or 7 honors classes, right? Then they don't want to see 0 honors classes or 2 honors classes. They want to see that a student is continuing to challenge themselves academically. Perhaps you do know this, or maybe you don't know this, but schools do see 12th grade grades at the time of application. I think 12th grade sometimes is the grade where they actually see your grades more frequently than they would at any other point in this process. So not only will they have your transcript with your performance from grades 9 through 11 on there, but they will then get, it depends on what time you're applying, they'll either get your quarterly grade report or your mid-year grade report. And then if they were worried about you, but they still really wanted you for some reason or another, they occasionally will call and ask for your most recent grades. So please don't drop in terms of rigor, but also don't drop in terms of the effort that you're putting into those courses. You don't want 3 years of payoff to not pay off, or 3 years of hard work to not pay off because you stopped doing everything in 12th grade. So this is something really important for your students to remember, and you can tell them I told you this. It's really important also for your students to stay active. There's really nothing worse than opening up an application and getting really excited about a student and seeing that they stopped all of their activities in senior year. So whereas before they were a really avid and highly ranked chess player, now all of a sudden they're not doing that anymore. They're not doing chess tournaments anymore, or they, I don't know, they were playing in the band, and then they decided this was the year they were going to stop doing that. If anything, this is where students should really be exercising their leadership skills, right? This is the grade to do that. This is where all of those really important roles and leadership opportunities are and exist, right? Whether that's student government president or drum major or first violin or I don't know, head of your school's very competitive robotics team or captain of whatever sport team, etc. So please stay active. Please don't tell your students, don't stop. Don't stop now. Keep going. That's important. Now, I did just mention a lot of leadership, and I know that that can be very anxiety inducing. So, as I said earlier, leadership can come out in a variety of different ways, and that doesn't necessarily mean holding a specific title. Holding a specific title does not make one a good leader. Sometimes it just makes you popular with your peers. That's great too. But there are, again, lots of ways to show leadership, whether that's in the classroom by helping your peers, or perhaps you really love, oh gosh, I don't know, you really love the language that you've been studying. And they don't offer it at the level you're studying it anymore in grade 12. So you do an independent study, or perhaps you're doing an independent research project. That's, I think, demonstrating leadership in terms of both yourself and your future. And that does count in terms of leadership. There aren't checklists. There's not something where schools are like, well, you didn't have leadership, so we're not going to admit you, right? That's not how it happens. And I'll talk a little bit about how the admission process works in general in a bit, but staying active is key. Really time to solidify that list if you haven't already in 12th grade. So really, hopefully those applications, you're writing them over the summer. Your students are writing those applications, but solidifying that list, students should have they should obviously know what their GPA is. They should have a test score that they're going to be submitting if they are submitting a test score, etc. And then it's time to really write those applications. And again, I would begin doing this summer after junior year. These, depending on what types of schools students are applying to, they take a tremendous amount of time to do. They are not something that can be completed the night before applications are due. And they are not something that can be completed, honestly, a week before applications are due if they are to be done well. The time spent on these applications is visible to the person on the receiving end. So the person reading those applications, they can tell when a student really put a lot of time and dedication into that, and that does pay off. And then 12th grade is when you need to compile everything, right? So not only do you need to make sure that you have asked for your teacher letter of recommendations, but you can keep an eye on the common application to make sure that those were submitted on your behalf. You want to make sure that you've submitted all of your testing to all of the schools you're going to submit your testing to. You want to make sure all of this is done well before the due date. And the due dates on these applications for an early application is the 1st of November, and for a regular decision application is the 1st of January. There's a lot of nuance in this process that I won't get into, but I think you can just sort of go by those 2 dates. So I thought we could dive in a little to the application from the student's perspective, just to give you a sense of what it looks like, and hopefully just show you something you maybe haven't seen before, because that's always exciting, right? So a student will create an application in the common application. Nearly all schools in the States and even outside of the States use the common application, which means that they generally enter their biographical information, and their activities list in one spot. And then different colleges will have different questions that they ask you. So it's actually a really nice resource for students, and something that they could make an application now, or you could look at now if it was interesting to you. So they do a search through the My Colleges tab, and that will then add them to this list. And then, as you can see, tells you what's in progress and what's due, etc. So I wanted to show you, they also have this really nice requirements grid. So it gives you sort of an overview of schools, what they require, whether they're flexible. That word flexible and never required can be, well, again, you're all lawyers, I'll let you read into that. But usually talking to an advisor is good for this. And then I wanted to show you what in a supplemental application looks like. So I pulled one, and you might be thinking to yourself, I've never heard of this school, the Franklin W. Olin College of Engineering. But Olin College of Engineering is actually an extremely selective engineering school. They accept about 88 students, or they have a class, an incoming class of generally about 88 students, and it's free if you attend. So as you can see here, their questions really focus on community because this is a very small community. I wouldn't be able to write, personally, I'm an adult and this is my job. I wouldn't be able to write this prompt over, the day before it was due, right? This is a pretty challenging prompt. And it's not just the first one they have, but you actually have to write 2 separate essays for Olin, right? So one on what you want to do to improve people's lives through engineering, which means that you should have some engineering background, which is why I hope you spent 9th grade thinking about what you'd like to study and then pursuing those interests throughout time, because now you have things to write about. But you also have a second prompt that you need to choose from below, and really thinking about your impact on a community. So I've talked about these as academic institutions, and you might be wondering, well, if they're academic institutions, then why do they want students to focus on activities? And the reason for that is that these are campus communities, and they want students who are going to be a part of that campus community, and they want to know, what will this student add to our campus community? So I pulled this from Yale again because I think it demonstrates that to be done well, this cannot be done a week beforehand, but that they are expecting students to have an intellectual interest. That does not mean the intellectual interest cannot change. It certainly can, and schools expect it to, but they want to know that students, as they come in, are intellectually curious, right? That they have a lot of interests and that they've pursued them, again, outside of the classroom. So Yale expects you to tell them about your engagement with a topic or idea that excites you and why you're drawn to it in what seems like an easy amount of words, but is actually quite difficult. So the application from the admission officer's perspective. So in speaking about schools that have, the most selective admission rate, so that 10% or less admission rate, or schools that generally practice what's called holistic admission. So what that means is they take into account really everything that's in that application. So from what extracurricular activities and to what level a student participated in, to the rigor of their coursework, to how they performed as the rigor increased, to taking into consideration those letters of recommendation, to the test scores, and really thinking about is this a student that will thrive at this university? And if so, what unique perspective or ideas do they bring to us, right? So there are schools that do have, literally lists, and they check things off. And if you get the, certain number of points, then that's an offer of admission from that school. But really the most selective schools are practicing what's called holistic admission. So I would open up a file, and I would always first go to the transcript to make sure that a student was challenging themselves and had done well against those challenges. I would spend some time looking at the student's biography. Where did they go to school? What type of household did they grow up in? All of this would tell me perhaps a little about what the student might have faced in terms of challenges, or perhaps in terms of opportunities, right? So really thinking about it that way. I would then look at the activities list to see what a student had been involved in, and then I would dive into all of the letters and the essays to get a real sense of that applicant. So that is a very short what the admission officer sees. And they are looking to build campus communities, and I think that's really important to keep in mind, right? And these are generally particularly those very selective schools. They don't tend to be very large schools, anywhere from, quite small schools to, about 600 students per class to about, 3,000. So it's a big range, but they're looking to see, who's going to come here and take charge, be involved, be really excited, and, be people that our professors are excited to teach. So a few resources here for you. So we would obviously, if you haven't already, encourage you to sign up to our newsletter, which will then give you lots of opportunities to engage with us in terms of, sorry, Erica, I was just mindful of the time here, in terms of our webinars and panels that we put on. I would encourage you to go to College Board's Big Future, which has a couple of really nice tools, and it will also take you to Khan Academy, which is free SAT prep, which is great. I encourage you to use. And then Peterson's College Search Tool is another tool. And then this is just a little look at what the Big Future looks like for the College Board. And again, I think it'd just be a really helpful place to start. And then just very briefly, before I stop talking, because I could honestly talk about this forever, is thinking about fit. And this is something that is deeply important to me and has always been important to me throughout my career, whether that was at a business school or medical school, or whether that was at Princeton. And certainly now as I advise students, is to think about fit. So not all schools are for all people, and not all people are for all schools, and that's okay. And perhaps you're thinking to yourself, well, yeah, lady, like, of course. But I think sometimes we miss that somewhere. So these are really great ways to assess fit, right? Do you have a student that doesn't like to be far from home? Do you have a student that can't wait to get away from you, but you know that they don't actually really want to be that far away from you? Do you have a student who only wants to study, I don't know, Sanskrit, right? Like, there are a few schools off the top of my head I could name for you, but not all of them have Sanskrit as an area of study, or Egyptology. What type of school do they want to attend? Do you know that they would thrive in a really vibrant big school environment, or are you worried, and do you think they would really only thrive at a very small school? Where do they think they would thrive? What type of student life do they have? What's available to the student there? Does your student love to build, I don't know, cars, right? There, a fair number of schools have car building clubs, but you want to make sure the school you're applying to has whatever it happens to be that your student is really passionate about. I will hand it over to Erica if you want to talk a little bit about what we do in our services again. And if you don't, I'm happy to open it up for questions, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marielle. And thank you so much to those who attended. There is already another question in the chat. And while I'm reading it, I would encourage anyone else to ask questions in the chat if there are any. So Marielle, the question was, for grades 9 through 11, do colleges only see semester grades, or do they also see quarter grades?
That is a great question, and it actually depends on how your school reports its transcript. So it just depends on your school. Most schools only report semester grades. That's obviously better. Though I will say those are the only grades that schools are going to count. So if they saw that your student had a C at the quarter and then somehow pulled off an A, it's not a bad thing, and they won't count the quarter grade. But it just really depends on the school.
Okay, great. Along the same grade line, someone else asked, do grades in 7th and 8th grades count toward a student's GPA for college?
Generally, no, they do not, even if they are on the transcript. So occasionally what I would see would be if a student took, like, let's say Algebra 2 or, I don't know, French, Spanish, whatever language, and that counted in terms of high school credit. Oftentimes that grade is not even on the transcript, but if it was, it still wouldn't count. It's really only grades 9 through 12.
Okay. I think those were the only questions. There was a letter of recommendation question.
Yes.
Grades questions. I put the discount code for an initial consultation as well as my email address in the chat. So we're so appreciative to Stephanie and Liz for the opportunities to present our various workshops. I think this concludes our series of workshops. So thank you all very much for attending. And any last questions?
I'm here. I'll answer just about anything.
Okay. Well, okay. One more. Here it came.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Okay. How
Yeah.
do you decide SAT versus ACT? Which to take?
Yeah. What I would recommend students do is take a diagnostic in both and see which one either they performed better in or which one they preferred. They are both testing the same types of skills, but they test them in very different ways. So some students prefer an ACT over the SAT and vice versa. The timing also is a slightly different on those sections. So some students just do better with the way they're timed. So really up to the student, but doing a diagnostic is a great way to figure that out.
And that same parent with a few questions said this was super helpful. So
Good.
pass along the feedback. Okay, any other questions? Oh, okay, here's one more. How does this apply to children of military parents? My understanding is that my son's school is paid for, but I don't understand what is required.
Yes. So I feel like I'm not as qualified to answer this as I would like to be. So what I will say is that the financial aid offices at any school your son is looking at would be happy to talk to you about how the funding works, because it works in a couple of different ways, whether it's I won't get into it, whether it's a yellow ribbon school or whether you used any of those, whether the student's parents used any of the benefits. Oftentimes the benefits can cover, depends how many kids you have and how you want to divide those benefits. It gets very complicated and it is not my area of expertise, but calling a school and asking would be a great way to figure that out.
Do you think that the guidance counselor at a person's high school, or better to call the school directly, the colleges directly?
You could start with a guidance counselor, but it's probably just best. I would start with a guidance counselor, and then I think it's probably just best to call the schools directly. They'll give you a better sense of understanding because, again, not all, you'd think they'd all do it the same way, but they don't. Let's see. And they also, this is perhaps for nobody here, but I know that they ended some of the funding after a certain point. So another thing to look into. What's the best way for a drama student to spend 10th and 11th grade summers? Great question. So it depends on how, it depends on your student and how much they enjoy acting, or perhaps they like production, or they like stage design, or they like directing, or what have you. There are a couple of programs that they could look into. Interlochen would be probably the most selective one. You could look at a few of the, you're all in New York City, you could look at a few of the Juilliard programs. Attending, this might sound very silly, but actually going and attending as much theater as possible and reading plays, is really important actually. And then they can speak to that on the application. That's all actually really valuable. If they do any sort of pre-professional or professional acting, just making sure they're keeping, track of what they're performing in. And I will just say, for any of you who have students who are in the arts, if a school and your student is very talented, submitting an arts portfolio is something that you should consider doing if a school accepts an arts portfolio.
Do you want to put in the chat really quickly? You mentioned 2 or 3 programs.
Yeah.
You said them quickly.
Interlochen, Tanglewood for music. Interlochen is arts in general, so voice, music, theater. Tanglewood is for music. Berkeley College, music, also for music. If you have dancers, any of the pre-professional programs for dancers, like American, Joffrey.
Gosh, there's probably a lot, so I don't want to put you on the spot to.
No, it's fine.
But that probably gives people a good sense, and they can always reach out to us for more.
Yes, yeah. So.
Well, it is just about 1:30. I know we started a couple of minutes late because of some technical difficulties, but we seem to have caught up, and I think it looks like we can end on time. So any other last minute questions? Doesn't look like it. Okay, well, thank you all so very much. Thank you, Marielle, for sharing your wisdom. And we hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day.